Hi, I'm going to demo the SSH user experience with Tatu. Let's start by launching a new VM. I'm going to give the VM a name, Foxy. I'm going to use a Fedora image, small flavor, and an IPv4 network that is routable from the provider network. I want you to note that I am not going to assign a key pair to the VM, yet I will be able to SSH into the VM thanks to Tatu. Also, I will not assign a floating IP to this VM. And again, despite not having the floating IP, I will be able to SSH into Tatu. So no floating IP and no key pair, thanks to Tatu setting up certificates and a bastion for me. Now, while the VM spawns, I'm on my client machine, which is actually a DevStack instance. And I'm going to generate a new key pair. All right. Here we are. Now this is something a user would only have to do once. Having generated the key pair, I want to generate a certificate. So I'm going to launch this new OpenStack CLI command, which is user cert create, and it takes as parameters the implicit project and user ID and the new key that I just generated. And then the output, meaning the certificate, will be written to a file in my SSH folder. All right, now we can take a look at that certificate that was generated. I have an error in my code at the moment which generates an extra new line, so I'm going to remove that new line by hand. And we can actually output the what's interesting about this certificate using SSH keygen. Okay, you can see that the serial number is 24. I use serial numbers to do certificate revocation. This key ID should be set to something more informational, like the name of the user. The principles list is currently hard-coded, but I'm working on making these principles from the keystone roles. Now, one other thing that the user will do once in preparation and not on every VM launch is to actually get the public key of the certificate authority. So what this command does is it writes to known hosts the line @certificate authority star stands for the domain of trusted VMs by this authority. And what it pastes here is the public key corresponding to the certificate authority that signs hosts. So it's basically saying I trust hosts that are trusted by this certificate authority. And again, new OpenStack CLI, OpenStack SSH certificate authority show, and I'm going to cut out the value host public key. And this takes as parameter the project ID. Now let's examine the output of that command. Okay, you can see that this line was added. Now, usually I get the man in the middle attack and the warning that the key is not recognized, and for every VM you SSH to, a line is added to this file, to the known host file. With Tatu, that won't happen. This is the only line in the known host file you'll need. You'll need one per project. let's go ahead and use the key that we just generated. Okay, there it is. And we called our host Foxy. Note that I'm using a wrapper around SSH that will resolve the SRV record, meaning it will get both an A record and a port number, and then it will resolve the A record to an IP address. And that's because I'm using a shared bastion, so I'm going to go to different ports for each VM. So each VM gets assigned a different port on the bastion. You can see here that the resolution of the SRV record found port 55 and this A record, okay, which has encoded in its name the IP address. The A record then gets resolved in this line, and it's this address 172.24.411. And finally, we know that we can SSH to that VM via that IP and this port. You can see further down in the verbose output of SSH that the server offered a host certificate, okay, that Tatu signed for it, and the client, my SSH client, recognizes the host certificate, and because it found that certificate authority's key in the known host file over there. Further down, where we are now, the client offered its public key first, and the server did not accept it. In fact, it said the authentications that can continue are these other ones. Then the client goes ahead and offers its certificate, and in that case, the server does accept it. So I'm being asked to enter my passphrase for my private key. And having entered that, I'm now in the Foxy VM that I launched. Now, I exit this and show you how key revocation works. I have some new panels in Horizon for SSH as a service, so I can come to the user certificates and revoke the certificate, certificate number 24. So here's certificate number 24. You can see that, just want to show you, this is the revoked column. Certificate 24 was not revoked. We'll be using certificate 22 in a second as well. It hasn't been revoked. So let's go ahead and revoke certificate 24, serial number 24. Okay. Now, in theory, I should be able to no longer SSH with that certificate, but I should be able to SSH with certificate 24. This has a refresh problem. Let's go ahead and do that to a refresh here. Okay, you can see now that was revoked is true for certificate 24. It's still false for certificate 22. So we'll try once again. Now in the background, the VMs are polling for certificate revocation list changes. So I'm going to try again to SSH with key 24. And now you can see that at the end of the SSH negotiation, the certificate was not accepted. You can see that the alternatives are being proposed after the certificate was accepted, was not accepted, and I'm being asked for the password of the account I'm trying to log into, which is root right now. It won't be in the short future, in the near future. Well, let me try again with a certificate that has not been revoked. Okay. And you can see that I'm in the Foxy VM. Okay, so I've demonstrated that you can revoke certificates. We could have done this via the CLI as well. You have panels here to view the certificate authorities, so you can manually copy-paste the public keys if you need to. And similarly, you can examine host certificates. The host certificates are interesting to look at because in the host certificate output, you can see the DNS records and the port address translation based bastions. It's I'm not an Angular expert, so my code is very slow to load. So there's host Foxy. You can see the SSH record here, SSH-TCP Foxy. This is the prefix of the project ID for my user, and this is the IP address of the bastion and the port assigned to this VM. So essentially any SSH connection to this IP and port will go to the VM's port 22 on its private address. And that concludes the demo. Thanks very much.